Hey everyone, welcome back. Previous video we were working on the host menu from the design perspective, so we still have that up here. So our host game menu is set up. Players can enter a name for their server, choose the number of players, toggle whether or not they're playing locally or via the internet. So this is where we left off. I'm going to compile and save this. What we're going to do in this video is start working on the graph portion now. Again, this is the host menu widget, so inside of our main menu, host menu widget. We're now on the graph now, where we're going to set up the scripted functionality for how this menu behaves. So inside of here, we don't need the event tick. Going to delete that. We're going to use the event construct. First thing we're going to do is get a reference to our game info instance. So let's right click and say get game instance. Get the game instance. Once we have it, cast to the only one we have here, the game info instance. Let's connect that up. And let's promote this to a variable, which we'll call the game instance, game info instance. What did we call it in the other one? I want to be consistent. What did we call it in the other one? I'm just going to look real quick. You can name it whatever you want, but we called it game instance ref. So I'm going to call all of these game instance ref. So game instance ref is what we're going to call it. So. And the next thing that we're going to do upon construct is take our user server name, so our text box there, hold control, drag that in, drag off of it, and say set text box. So this one down here at the bottom, set text box. We're going to connect this up. And we're going to set the text to empty so that it is empty by default. So that's all we're going to do. Let's add a comment around this. Hit C and say get reference to game info instance and set the text box to empty. So compile and save that. Okay, let's go ahead. Next thing we're going to do is start working on the text box here. So what happens when the user starts to enter text into it? For this, there's a couple events on text changed and on text committed. As long as the user starts to enter text in, we're going to fire off that event. So let's go ahead and click this plus sign here. So on text change. First thing we're going to do is check if the text is empty. So we'll say, let's drag off of this and say, is text empty? Or text is empty. Had it backwards there. So text is empty. It's going to return a Boolean for us. I'm going to hold B and left click, create a branch, connect this up, connect that up. OK. And what we want to do is, if the text is empty, then we don't want to allow the player to hit accept and have a server with an empty named server name. So what we'll do is let's promote this to a variable. So I'm going to right click on this, promote this to a variable, which we'll call server name text. Move this over here. We'll connect that up off the false. I'm also going to assign this to a category, which will say server settings. So, and if we determine that it is empty, we're going to need a Boolean variable here. So I'm going to create a Boolean variable, and we'll call this except is enabled question mark. We'll also assign it to the server settings. We're not going to set that, so I'm going to hold Alt and drag that in, like so. So let's hit that. I'm going to check that. So off the false, we're saying no, the text is not empty actually. So we're going to enable the accept button, or accept button here. Let's do the opposite now. So I'm going to take both of these, copy and paste them, uncheck that, and just plug this in like so. Connect that up like so. So text is empty. We're not going to allow you to hit accept. And we're going to bind these properties here towards the end of this video in a moment. So let's add a comment around this and say enable/disable accept button once text has been entered. So like so. Next thing we'll do is what happens when we click the back button. Just going down the list here. Whenever we hit the back button, because that's going to be easy, let's go and do that. On clicked for this, for the back button. Move this stuff over. What we'll do is let's drag off this and say remove from parent. So we're removing the host menu. We're going to take our game instance ref here, control drag that in. We're then going to show the main menu at that point. So show main menu. Let's plug that in. So all this is returning to the main menu. So I'm going to add a comment around this and say return to main menu. Okay. Next thing we did back, so let's do accept. So whenever we click on accept, add an on clicked. Same thing, we're going to remove from parent. So I'm going to copy that and paste it. Plug this in. Guess I could have grabbed this as well. Our game instance reference, we're going to need that. So let's have that. And once we've accepted, we're going to launch our lobby. So let's drag off this and say launch lobby. And it's got a bunch of pins that we need to fill out. So for these, what we're going to do is let's promote these to variables. So I'm going to promote this to a variable by right-clicking, promote to variable. We'll call this number of players. So enable LAN, we'll promote that to a variable. We'll just call that enable LAN question mark. And server name, let's promote that to a variable as well. This is just going to be called server name text. Oh, you know what? We already had that. Let's delete that. We already created that variable. So I'm going to delete this. I'm just going to take this now and drag it and drop it on top. So we're passing this information through now to our game info instance. So let's add a comment around this. Let's see and say host settings are confirmed. Call and launch the lobby. Okay, compile and save. Okay, the next thing that we'll do is how we toggle these two options here. So this option and this option, how we toggle those. We're going to need some variables to keep track of that. So let's see. Let's start out with the number of players. So decrease, let's select this, add an on clicked. Increase, add an on clicked. And let's see. Let's also put our number of players variable in our server settings, just because. So. Okay. We do also need to make sure that this is set to a default value, so it's not 0. So I'm going to set that to 2 by default. Copy that, or compile that and save it. Okay. So what we'll do now is let's control drag in number of players. And let's alt drag in number of players, because we're going to set that now. And for this, we're just going to, let's see, minus integer. So I'm decreasing the number now. We need to define the max number of players that we're going to allow for our players to create. This is totally up to you. But I'm going to create another variable, and we'll call it an integer, which will be called max number of players. It's going to be in the server settings. I'm going to compile, and we'll say 8 is the max that we can have. But again, that's completely up to you. Now, the reason we did this is we're going to clamp this value here. We'll clamp it, clamp int, and the minimum is going to be 2. The maximum is going to be the max number of players. We're going to plug that in like so. I'm going to take all of this, copy and paste it, plug this in, and I'm going to change this to a plus now. Integer plus integer, which will be clamped at the max value. So that's all we need to do to increase and decrease the number of players. So let's add a comment around that and say decrease. Wow, what was that? Decrease / increase the number of players. Okay, we're almost done. A couple more things we need to do. Let's toggle the land setting. So toggle left on clicked, and toggle right on clicked. And for this, let's see, let's take this. Our enable LAN was not sitting in our server settings. Let's put that up there too. Server settings. Okay, let's take this, enable LAN now, control drag that in. Let's hold B and left click to create a branch. Plug this in, connect this up. And what we're searching for here is enable LAN already set to true. If it is, then we're not going to do anything. If it's not, then we're going to set enable LAN. So hold Alt, drag it in. We're going to set it to false. Or excuse me, set it to true. Okay. We need to create another variable now. So let's create another variable. This variable is going to be called play mode text. And it's going to be of the text type. And we're going to put it in the server settings. Let's compile. Let's Alt drag that play mode text in now. Connect this up. And for the text, we'll say LAN. Because we're going to bind this property as we close out this video here in a second. So now with that, I can take all of these, copy it, paste it, plug this in, except now we're going off the true here. So I'm going to hold Control and drag that and put that up there. And we're going to uncheck this, and we're going to change the play mode text to internet. Or Steam, or whatever you want to put here. Okay. I think that's all we need to do on the graph. Let me just double check my notes. I think that's all we're going to do. Let's add a commenter on this. And this is just toggle the play mode. That's going to bug me. Okay, our graph is done. We need to bind some of the values in our designer tab now. So let's go ahead and do all that. Let's make sure that we have some defaults for these play mode text. If we don't, let's set that to LAN is the default. Max number of players, we've set that. Enable LAN by default. Yes, we want that to be true. Number of players is 2. Accept is enabled by default. That is false. We don't want that to be true by default. Server name text, we'll just say empty by default for this as well. So our defaults are set. Let's compile and save. Let's go to the designer tab and bind some of those properties now. And then we should be able to test this out, and we'll close out the video. Okay, so let's see. The number of players, we want to bind this. So our number of players here, we're going to bind this. This is actually going to be a function that we're going to have to bind this to. So this is the last bit of blueprint scripting we'll have to do in here. So we'll create a binding for this. The reason being is we're going to take our number of players, hold Control and drag that in, and plug that in like so, because it's an integer, it's not a text value. So that should be all we need to do for that. And just so it's something better than get text, we'll say convert num players. So let's compile and save and go back to the designer. Convert num players will convert this for us. Okay, the LAN, this text here, we can bind that directly to text. That's going to be our play mode text, like so. And then our accept button, let's see, let's go down to our accept button. Under behavior is enabled, we're going to bind that to accept is enabled. So, and let's compile and save. Let's test this out real quick. Hopefully everything works. So we're on our main menu here. We go to host game. Boom. Accept is not enabled by default, but as soon as we start typing, accept becomes enabled. As soon as we don't, it goes away. Now it doesn't keep track of spacebar because those register as characters. You could take it a step further and say, no, you can't have spacebar characters in your server name, but I think this is fine. Let's see. These turn yellow when I highlight over them. Back button does as well. That's a great server name. Caps at 8, caps at 2, internet, LAN. So we're good. If we hit accept, nothing will happen. I don't think nothing will happen. Let's see. Yep. Nothing really happens yet. We need to set that up a little bit later. But we're going to pause here. I think this is good for now. Our host menu is set up. We'll pick it up in the next video where we start working on the options menu and get that all set up. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you then.